You know, when I went to board, I told them that I don't deserve freedom because I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I'm asking for mercy. And when they granted me parole, like I felt a sense of responsibility. But coming home, I've experienced so much adversity, and my rebirth has been a conscious awareness that people are still hurting. And like I've adopted this model that we're not broken, we're just hurting. And most of us are hurting in silence because when we try to talk about it, people either didn't listen to us or they didn't know how.
What up, sis? What up to my brothers watching this as well? Welcome back to Girl, We Got This. Today, in this month, we are celebrating men in mental health. And we were at the Prism Way with these incredible men that have stories to tell. As you know, the Prism Way is a space for healing. It's a space of refuge for people that have been incarcerated, that they come and they heal and to get back acclimated into this world. I've sat down with these incredible people and I was blown away by their emotional intelligence, their beauty for life, and just their truth. This is what Girl, We Got This is about. Girl, We Got This. We sit with people that have stories to tell because we all have stories to tell and we're all worthy of our stories. So we're going to get into it with Fred. Fred is our first guest with this beautiful collaboration. I am so excited to have you, Fred.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Meet Fred Griffin. People, I want to know everything about you because you're one of the most, for me, when I sat down with you for the first time, you really, really made me think. You were so profound in what you learned in your story from the beginning to where you are now. So I want to share the beauty of you with the people.
Thank you.
So, Fred Griffin, where are you from? What's up? How you feeling? How you feeling first?
First and foremost, I feel humbled. And I feel seen, right? Like for so long, I didn't feel seen as a human being, as a person. So I just want to say thank you for having me on. And before we go into anything, I just want to start off by saying, like, you know, I am mindful of the fact that my decisions have caused harm to people. And so by no way am I trying to justify or minimize the decisions I made. I just want to share my story because I was a hurt person that made a decision to go out and hurt other people. And even though I didn't have a right to hurt people, I also didn't have access to the resources. And so I'm hoping that in sharing this story that I can connect with someone that's out there, a young man like me, who may have been feeling shame or guilt or resentment or feeling unloved, and to let them know that there are other avenues other than the streets or the gang or the criminal lifestyle or just violence, right? Like, you know, as a man, I thought violence was the only way I could be seen, and it's not true. And so I just want to start off by saying that. I grew up in South Central in the city of Watts. I was raised by a single mother, and she did the best that she could. She was raised by my grandmother, who was addicted to PCP. My grandfather was murdered.
What is PCP?
I don't know the clinical term, but we call it SHRM in the streets. And my mother went through a lot of traumatic experiences, and she had me and I have two siblings. She had me at the age of 21, and my mother was still in the streets, right? Like she was coping with the things that she had dealt with. And as a result, I grew up feeling neglected, feeling unloved, feeling abandoned, feeling unwanted. My father's been in prison my whole life. He wasn't there. Throughout the course of my childhood, I was sexually abused from the age of 6 to 13 by multiple men, which caused a lot of shame.
Now, can I ask you a question? Were you the oldest, youngest?
I was the youngest of 3.
Okay. And are your siblings boys, girls?
I have a sister that's 6 years older, and I have a brother that's 3 years older than me.
Okay. So you were the youngest.
Yes.
So you were dealing with a lot. single mother home. I'm just going to paint the picture.
Absolutely.
Single mother home, no father, father in jail, in prison. Young man in Watts. Now, can you explain to the people what Watts was like for you growing up? Because I don't know if everybody knows what Watts is and what it consists of.
So Watts is, I want to say like a 2-3 mile radius, gang infested, a lot of crime, a lot of fighting, a lot of drugs, a lot of bullying. It's a lot of good people there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to paint the picture of the whole city of Watts. It's just a horrible place. But just my experience there, there was just a lot of like instability, right? Like I didn't feel safe walking to the store. I didn't feel safe going to school. I didn't feel safe, being at home because people's houses were getting broken into. And so like, this is just the environment I grew up in.
Right. And now this Watts is 20 minutes outside of the city of LA, right? It's not far. No. I think a lot of people don't understand that you have these economic crises in big spaces where there's a lot of, people live a different life 15 minutes away.
Right.
And another 15 minutes down the street, it could be a completely different life that this young man has to grow up in.
Correct.
And has to literally survive. So would you say as a young man, when you were in survival mode growing up in Watts?
Absolutely. I would say that every decision I made was because I thought my life was in danger. And that has a lot to do with mental health, right? Like I didn't feel safe. And so I created these personas and these masks to try to give me a sense of control over my environment. I had no control over my environment.
Right.
I didn't control where we lived, who we lived with, who I interacted with. But in my mind, I'm looking at, well, it has to be me. I'm the only common denominator in all of these scenarios.
Right. So now you're 6 years old dealing with sexual abuse. How did you even get through that?
Disassociation.
Yeah. That's so sad. I'm so sorry.
And I feel like it's so relevant to the topic of like mental health.
Yeah.
Because I definitely developed codependency, low self-esteem. I had a shame-based personality where like I looked as if like somehow it was my fault. I developed destructive entitlement as a result of not knowing how to process it. Like I felt I had the right to hurt people because I was hurt. I developed criminal thinking, right? Like I was young and my abuser was bigger than me. And so instead of physically assaulting or trying to get back at him, I started stealing, taking things from him that I felt would be some way of like retribution or retaliation, which ultimately would lead to my life crime. Because I end up carjacking multiple people. And so it took me years to see the distinction or the connection actually of feeling like something was taken from me in the abuse and then me going out and taking from other people. Wow. For years.
Wow. Hold on. I need to pause this because this is like renowned for me. For you to have the capacity to understand how that abuse shaped you and created this person that isn't you, but you were literally seeking to retrieve your life back. And unfortunately, that retrieval was carjacking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there are so many people that don't even understand how sexual abuse affects them. So I just want to like take a moment to give you my praise because that's a huge finding. Like in self, like internal self, to realize, to go back and to be like, I was actually just trying to get something back, but it was really me that I was trying to retrieve. I mean, that's huge. That's powerful.
It took a while to get there.
Yeah.
It took a while for me actually to honor the 6-year-old, right? Because, I blamed myself for the abuse. Because it started with molestation. And at the age of 9, I had an encounter with a young woman that made me question like what had been happening for the past 3 years. And so when I went, the person who abused me was a family member. And so when I went to confront that family member, the abuse transitioned from molestation to just full out rape. And while the rape was happening, of course, I'm asking myself, why did you say something? Right? And now I'm hating myself. Like the hate went from the abuser to now, like, why did you open your mouth, which will result in me becoming passive.
Right.
Like I like suppress my voice because I'm thinking, well, when you open your mouth, you make things worse. Right? That was a belief I ended up developing. But it was years later that I realized that my inner child was hurting because I was neglecting to appreciate the strength and the resilience that I had to have to endure, to not succumb to the suicidal thoughts or to not succumb to the drugs and the things to numb that pain, right? And I'm grateful because I've met a lot of survivors, right? I was a victim before. Today I'm a survivor. I met a lot of survivors who needed to hear that it was okay, that they experienced it, but they don't have to be defined by it.
Right. Wow. I'm going to probably get so emotional this episode, so everybody just bear with me because this is life. And so many of us go through this and are suppressing it probably still.
Yeah.
Or don't have the emotional intelligence or the capacity to even go there because I know it's hard. It's not easy to go back to these traumatic times in our lives and to really unfold. It's not. So again, I commend you for having the strength to go there and do that. So back to you. So now you're angry. You have this hatred, carjacking. What happens next?
So I committed 13 carjackings in 3 days.
Wow. How did you do that?
Well, I have to back up a little bit. So at the age of 11, I was raised a gang member in the culture, but at the age of 11, I joined the gang. And that's when my self-hatred became external.
Why did you join the gang?
Because the gang was an avenue in which I can hurt people and people wouldn't question it.
Wow.
Like I felt if I went out and hurt people, they would want to know, why are you so angry? And I would tell them about the abuse. But growing up in the neighborhood, when I would express anger, people would credit it to the gang. And then it was that, I can hide my true self behind the gang, because in that culture, being violent, being aggressive, being like having authority conflict, all these things I developed as a result of the abuse were able to be masked in the gang. And so, but what happened is I was trying to resolve an internal conflict I had, which was shame, with external things. It's impossible. So like in CGA, we talk about OCP. It's obsession, compulsion, progression. It's a cycle of addiction. The more I obsessed over the abuse and the shame and feeling less than a man, the more I felt compelled to go prove my manhood. So I overcompensated. Fights, girls, drugs, gang activity, but it never satisfied. And so it progressed into deeper and deeper things. So it started off with stealing candy, to, stealing toys, to mocking people, bullying people. Eventually I started carrying weapons, start robbing people, and eventually it led to carjacking. The carjacking, what it gave me was, it gave me a sense of praise and approval that I was lacking because of the low self-esteem I felt.
Right.
And eventually I got arrested. I was facing 430 years in 6 life sentences. I was 16 years old. It was 3 weeks after my 16th birthday. My bail was $4 million.
Wow.
I fought my fitness, which is like they're trying to see if you should stay in juvenile court or adult court. I lost because the severity of the crime, and I had a loaded weapon when I was arrested. And I ended up getting sentenced to 30 years at 17.
Wow.
And I went to prison 17 years old.
Wow. What was going through your head?
Part of me knew that I was going to prison. I was suicidal. I didn't think my life had value or worth. For me to be abused so many times, so regularly, I believed I was a problem, you know? And so I felt that maybe life would be better if I wasn't in it, but I didn't have the courage to end my own life. And so I was out here living reckless, impulsive. And so when I was arrested, I actually literally felt like I was like rescued.
Wow.
And then I dove into the subculture of juvenile halls and YA where, you know, toxic masculinity, right? Like everyone's trying to prove that they're not afraid because they're afraid. And then I put on more masks. In jail,
Yeah.
because like I'm sharing some of the things I'm doing and people are looking to me as if I'm a leader. And now I feel like an imposter because I know the true intentions behind what I'm doing, right? They think I'm doing it for the game, but in reality, I'm doing it because I'm trying to quiet this voice in my head that tells me that I'm less than a man because I was molested.
Wow.
And that went on for about 18 months. And at the age of 17, God got a hold of me. Literally, like in the midst of my chaos, God got a hold of me, changed my life. I separated from the gang, but I did not deal with the trauma. And so I separated from the gang, but I never knew what it was to have a gang mentality because I was raised in it. That's a whole nother mental health issue. It's like people are trying to address gang activity without addressing the mindset behind it. I only went to the gang because I didn't feel like I belonged. And I didn't feel like I belonged because I didn't feel like someone wasn't there to protect me. Like, I need to feel safe. Matter of fact, as a human being, we all need to feel safe. And when I didn't feel safe, I went out and did things that made me feel safer.
And you felt safe in that gang because that was your home. And then you build this mentality that everyone else around you has. It makes sense.
Yeah.
You become your environment. You become the people you surround yourself with. But you're around all of these people that probably don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That are all probably dealing with trauma and masking, as you said.
Right.
And then it creates this world of toxicity and of danger and of just, honestly, it's just sadness, really. And trauma and pain. It's people unhealed trying to still appear as men, right?
Yeah. I think one of the most painful realities I had to face was not everyone in Watts were gang members.
Yes.
Not everyone in my household went to prison.
Yes.
Not everyone who was abused chose to hurt people. And so one of the hardest realities for me to face was that I chose to go out and hurt people. Right? For a long time, I'm like, oh, well, I hurt people because of this. No, I chose to hurt people because of this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's important to highlight too, because not everyone who's been abused chooses the route I went. Like some people choose to be DAs, judges, EMTs, nurses. I just happened to choose the route of hurting people. And that's why I started off with like taking accountability for that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the number one rule to this life. We all are living this life. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong way to live our lives, right? But you have to take accountability of the choices that you make in this life. I always say that we're all going to have different paths,
Right.
but it's up to us to change it. It's up to us to hold ourselves accountable for what we have done or what we may do, or we have done in the past. But life and God still has you here for a reason.
Yes.
So I want to discuss, now you're in prison. You're very young. My father actually was in prison, very young, before I was born, actually. And sometimes I sit there and listen to his stories and I'm like, whoa, like, how are you so young in this cage? That's how I felt. And it blew my mind sometimes. I'm just like, Dad, like, how did you survive that?
I want to tell you a brief story.
Yes, please.
For my 18th birthday, my mother comes to visit me in High Desert State Prison. It's way, way up. I was 18 years old, at level 4, maximum security. And when I walk in, she starts crying. And she's with my sister, and she's crying hysterically. And so I asked my sister, like, what's wrong with her? And she's like, I don't know. And, you know, we proceed with the visit, and she gathers herself. So I asked her, what was wrong? And she says, you look happy. And I said, and why would that make you, like, cry? And she's like, because I was afraid for you. Like, I didn't know how you were going to respond to going to prison. Like, you're 18 years old. You're 5'5", 150 pounds, right? And I tell her, I said, Mom, I feel like normal here. I grew up around murderers and gang members and pimps and drug dealers. Like, this is my normal. That statement was meant to give her comfort. I look back on that statement and I cry because at 18 years old, I felt safe in prison. And I feel like the reason I survived prison was because I prepared for it. Unfortunately, like, I was told at a young age, you're going to die or go to prison. Wow. And I believed that, and I, like, made it a goal.
Who told you that?
People in my neighborhood.
Wow.
Teachers, some family members, because they saw my behavior and they were trying to scare me out of behaving a certain way, not knowing that the narratives you present to people create pathways, right?
Yes.
And that narrative made it, like, I made it to prison. Wow. I'm here now. I was fortunate enough to where a lot of people saw that I was genuine in my desire to change, and they supported it. You don't hear that a lot about prison. Everyone thinks that prison is just this horrible, bitter place, and there are times when it is. But the average person in prison has more shame and remorse and guilt for what they've done than society gives them credit for. And when they see that there's someone trying to change, they'll support it. And I was supported throughout my whole time. I knew as a former gang member how to maneuver, how to navigate. And I'm extremely grateful because, like, I had a lot of men who spoke life into me. A lot of men who heard my story, because I've always shared about being molested, because I feel like a lot of men are suffering in silence. Because we're molested by women too. We just don't talk about it, right? And it may not be something that causes shame, but it causes hypersexuality.
Yes.
It causes low self-esteem because we only think we have value if we can please a woman. That's a mental health issue. And it's not talked about because we're told, oh, a man is judged or valued by how many women he sleep with. But then we wonder, why can't we connect with the woman we want to connect with? It's because we have so many soul ties, right? And I was able to survive because of the grace of God and because of the community of people who surrounded me and uplifted me.
When was that moment? When was Fred in prison and said, I no longer want to live this life? What got you there? For our audience members that are listening to this, when was that moment? When was that shift that made you want to pivot and change your life?
Well, there are multiple moments. The first moment, I went to a gang awareness class, and there's this guy named Mr. Newman. He was a gang coordinator. He shows us a video of these gang members in the 80s. And this guy is talking about, like, you know, I have to protect my community. I have to, you know, if somebody comes and makes our mother cry, we got to make 3 of their mothers cry. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I believe all of that. And I'm like, I'm looking around the room because I'm like, when was this made? And he's like, oh, this was made in the 80s. Wow. And I felt, for the first time, I felt shame because I'm telling myself that I chose this life. But that video showed me that, no, this life chose me. Like, these beliefs that I have they predate me. I thought I had ownership, right? Like, the whole point of joining the gang was that I wanted to take back my agency. And I just realized that I had no agency because I'm just following the steps of the gang, right? So the gang coordinator asked me a question. He says, Fred, out of 100% of your crimes, how many were committed against your rivals? And I'm 17 at the time.
Yeah.
So I'm like 100%. I got my chest poked out, my head high. And he's like, 100% of your crimes? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, so every car you broke into, every store you stole from, every girl you slept with? And I'm like, those are not crimes, because I'm thinking he's talking about violence. And he's like, if the police saw you do those things, would you get arrested? I'm like, yeah. So he's like, I'm going to ask you again. Out of 100% of your crimes, how many were against your rivals? And I hung my head in shame. I didn't want to answer the question. And he says, oh, no. It was in front of the whole class. Oh, you just had your chest poked out. How many? And I said 30%. And he says, so 70% of the crimes you committed were against the people you're protecting? Like, even now, I feel emotional.
Yeah.
Like, it was a heartbreak, because like the whole point was that no one was there to protect me. So I wanted to go hurt people. And then I developed this idea that I should protect people because there are monsters out there. And I was a monster. Like, these bars on these windows are not for the people in the other neighborhood. They're for us. That was a hard pill to swallow.
And that ignited change in you, that moment.
It shook the mask.
Yeah.
Because the gang gave me a sense of power and control. And in that moment, I felt powerless.
Wow.
I felt like a coward.
Wow. Oof. I have chills listening to this because it's so powerful. These moments in our lives, if you're able to be aware of what's happening, the people that are coming to you that are literally giving you this moment to sit with yourself and to face yourself. And it's hard and it's adverse to really sit and face what the actual realness is of your life. That's not easy to sit with.
There wasn't.
It's not easy. And then it's not easy to say, yeah, I'm wrong. Now I want to change this. Change is not easy.
No.
Change is not easy. So again, I'm gonna commend you probably this entire episode, but change is one of the hardest things because a lot of us are so comfortable in the familiarity of our life, whether it is evil, whether it's good, whether it's harmful. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it's easy. So that's what it is. But for you to face this head on and say, I'm changing. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. It was faith.
Yeah.
You know, I had a moment where, like, you know, I'm a strong believer in God. And what I couldn't do for myself, I was able to do because I have faith in God. And I remember getting on my knees and praying to God and saying, I don't even know if you're real, but if you are, I'll take the first step if you do the rest. That was June 7, 2008.
Wow.
I haven't been a gang member since. I haven't smoked or drinking since that day. And I just didn't know who I was.
Yes.
Like, because what was waiting for me was a scared little boy who felt that the world didn't love me. Right? Everything that I was, the identity I created was wrapped around the gang. And the fear I felt of being vulnerable and being myself, right? Like, if you go back to the conversation we had downstairs, immediately I'm like, oh no, that is you.
Yes.
Because there were no safe spaces for me to be smart.
Yeah.
There was no safe spaces for me to be sensitive, right? Like,
Yes.
I was a very sensitive kid. But in my neighborhood, that was seen as a weakness or as a potential threat.
Yes.
And so I was told, men don't cry. Stop being a girl. And if I'm being molested and I'm being told stop being a girl, I'm wondering, are these girl emotions? Like, and so it just caused so much chaos inside, like, you know, like so much confusion.
Yes.
And not having a safe place to go, I developed my own answers.
Wow. I know so many people can relate to this. So many men can just relate to the parts of not being able to cry. You acting like a girl. There's so many things, society, this pressure that's put on men. I don't think we talk about it enough, especially for Black men.
Absolutely.
Especially. I have brothers, I have fathers, I have uncles, and I see the trauma that's been passed down generation through our family. I just had my uncle, I shared with you, my uncle was in prison for over 30 something years and got released and passed away. So coming here and listening to your guys' stories, it really ignited me because you chose a different path. So now you're committing to this change. What are some of the steps that you did to continue this change in prison? Because I know there are some people that have been incarcerated that are listening to this episode. Mm-hmm. How could you encourage them? What steps, what mindset really? Because I know it's a mindset. You shared something with me once and you said you were laying in bed and you already knew like your life was over. In your head, you were in jail for the rest of your life. But I did not want to die in this body as this person, as this man. Mm-hmm. Which for me, I was like, holy shit. Like, wow. To have that moment of clarity. Now you're shifting. Now you're making these changes. What does that look like? What did that look like for you?
For me, it was, I had a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. I told him a story and he challenged me. At the end of the story, he said, I find it interesting that you just told me this story as if it made it okay for you to go out and hurt people. I didn't even realize that's what I was doing, but I was telling my life story and trying to say, well, look, of course I became this person. And he asked me a question. He says, if you thought you were going to die, your life has no value. Why didn't you want to help people? Why did you want to hurt them? Mm. And that, like, I was so hurt by his, like, I was like, I sat on my bed and played the victim, like, oh, I just opened up and got vulnerable with you. And he was like, yeah, you were vulnerable and I appreciate that, but I still want to know, why did you choose to hurt people? Mm. And like, when I thought I was going to die in prison, I had to ask myself a question of like, who do you want to be? Mm. Who are you? Mm. Not who you're expected to be, not who your mom raised you to be, not who society, like, who are you? Yeah. And when I like started to attach different identities, I'm a father, I'm a man of God, I'm a servant, I'm humble, I'm kind, I'm genuine, I have purpose. Then it becomes, what are you going to do with it?
Yes.
Right. And so then I made a conscious decision that if I'm going to die in prison, I'm going to die in prison helping people be okay with who they are. Mm. And that meant going into these spaces and having confrontational conversations, right? Like in our culture, we don't confront things.
Right.
But as a man, I don't believe that there are men or feminine emotions. We all have emotions. Some are expressed more by women and therefore society tags them as feminine. Mm. But I feel jealousy. I feel envy. Mm. I feel insecure. Mm-hmm. I also feel loved. So now here I am and I'm sharing space with people and they're responding because we all just want to feel human.
Yes.
Right? Like for so long, I thought I was a monster until one day somebody said, monsters don't cry. Wow. And I'm like, but I cry all the time. Mm. And he's like, exactly.
Wow. Wow. That's so much to take in. That is so much to take in for me because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about all of these men that have once been in your shoes. My ancestral lineage, the men in my father grew up in the streets of Brooklyn. So that feeling of not having or feeling safe or loved or feeling like a monster and seeking.
Yeah.
But then to listen to you, Fred, and see where you are now, and the emotional intelligence blows my mind in the most beautiful way possible of how aware and how life-changing that you made a decision to choose to change. You shared something with me earlier, and I want to talk about this because we are talking about men's mental health, suicide. So you're changing. You're making these very incredible changes in your life in prison. your cellmate, suicide. I know suicide happens in prison because my brother is a correctional officer, as I shared with you earlier, and it happens. How did that affect you in prison?
It still affects me to this day. His name is Blake, and he passed away December 17, 2020. And it was during COVID. You know, everyone has the experience of how COVID affected them, but it was a little bit more damaging for us inside. One, we couldn't social distance. Two, we were watching and afraid for all of our loved ones. And three, we were experiencing something that we didn't do to ourselves, right? Like the guards were the ones exposing us to the sickness while yelling at us to put masks on while fighting for the right to not have to wear a mask. And so it was just a lot of chaos. Blake was a very kind, humorous man. He helped me through, I went through a divorce in prison, and I felt a lot of shame over the fact that I was like starting to heal and feel happy. And I didn't feel I had the right to be happy because I felt like I had abandoned my daughter. I have a 7-year-old daughter I had while incarcerated. And he single-handedly like walked me through that process.
Wow.
And so I have a lot of love and a lot of appreciation for him. And I just remember being told I couldn't go back into my cell because the guards were coming to collect his property. And I'm like, well, why? Where is he? And they're like, he committed suicide. And it was like shock because he had a release date. He was going home. And I just didn't understand. Like, it was like my understanding of trauma expanded that day because I was all the emotional awareness, intelligence. It was just like, I just kept asking why, right? Which is the number one question people have is why. And that night they came and got his property and I'm cleaning up the cell and I had to keep reliving it because I would throw something of his property in the bag and then I would grab it and say, oh, no, he's going to want that. And I have to tell myself he's not coming back. And I just kept doing it back and forth. The only thing that got me through it, once again, was my faith and a conversation we had like a week before where he had came to me and he was telling me how much he appreciated me and my friendship. And I got mad at him because I'm like, I appreciate what you're saying, but the tone in which you're saying is if you don't deserve it. Like, you deserve a friend like me. Or like, you are worthy of a friendship. And I told him, I love you. You know, like, I don't choose my family and you're my brother. And I kept replaying that conversation because I kept having thoughts of like, what is the point of being so socially aware or so like emotionally intelligent if you can't help the people that's hurting you closest to you? And in the midst of that, God told me, you're making this about you. He was hurting and he made a decision that he felt was best and to honor the friendship you had instead of the friendship you lost. Since then, I've made a conscious decision to give people their flowers before they ever go into a casket, to express my appreciation for those in my life, and to show up and be present in my friendships because I just don't know what people are going through. And like, that's for whoever's listening, right? Like, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you feel shame, you feel like life would be better without you, I will strongly and highly encourage you to reach out to somebody you trust, to pray, to take a moment to gather yourself, because no matter what you're going through, you have value, you have purpose, and someone is going to miss you. They're going to need you. And what you're going through right now will open up a pathway and become a stepping stone for the next chapter in your life. And I'm saying that from experience. My life has ended 7 times, from the abuse, from going to prison, from finding out my closest friend was murdered, to like watching my cousin be murdered when I was 12. And every time the world kept spinning. And every time I grew stronger, it still hurts. And I don't feel like there is enough conversation about healed people are still hurting.
Yes.
Because life hurts.
Yes.
Life be lifing.
Life forever.
But it's okay.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that about Blake. I feel like from listening to you, he was like an angel. You guys had this beautiful friendship.
He was.
He's like an angel for you, sent from God to help you get through that process. But it was deeper. And I think that's the beauty of loving someone. I reflect that with my grandmother, for example. Like, we all have our people. You have your person. From him to you, you were his person. And I think it's so beautiful that he was able to express that to you in such a special way. Because when you don't have that person, life flips you back upside down. So I know that feeling. But it's so beautiful how you looked at that. Because we do make it about ourselves when we're hurting. But when you said that this is what he chose, it's not about me, that's such a big learning curve for everybody listening to this episode. I did that so many times, twice, recently with both my grandparents being gone and transitioned. And I was like, no, like this is their soul's path.
Right.
This is their journey. And like you said, we have to continue. On Girl, We Got This, as all of y'all know, we talk a lot about the death and rebirth. Whether you're living, you still go through deaths. I've died so many times as a woman, and I'm sure I will a couple more times as I live this beautiful life that we have. But the rebirth, right? We always rebirth, and we rebirth stronger and wiser and kinder, hopefully. With your deaths, how did Fred rebirth? When did you find out you were getting out of prison? How did this rebirth come to look like, to fruition to you?
I went to board and was granted parole, and I had to wait for the governor to sign off. So there was like a 6-month period. And the rebirth has been interesting. You know, when I went to board, I told them that I don't deserve freedom because I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I'm asking for mercy. And when they granted me parole, like I felt a sense of responsibility. But coming home, I've experienced so much adversity. I was released, and 2 days later, my 12-year-old cousin was murdered.
Wow.
A few months after, my uncle was murdered, and just like so many things have happened. And my rebirth has been a conscious awareness that people are still hurting. And like I've adopted this model that we're not broken, we're just hurting. And most of us are hurting in silence because when we tried to talk about it, people either didn't listen to us or they didn't know how. Right? And I feel like that's really important because there are times where we're opening up to people and they don't even know how to share space with you because of their own trauma. And that's important because their humanity stops them from being there for you, and that's okay, right? And I had to learn that lesson, right? Like when I tried to talk about the abuse with my grandmother, she whipped me. And she didn't whip me because she didn't believe me. She whipped me because she didn't want to be presented with the narrative that abuse was happening under her supervision. It took me years to see that. I'm still learning who I am today. I feel like one of the biggest mental health challenges I experience is survivor's remorse. When I went to prison, I was in the mindset of it's my life. If I die, I'm the one that's going to be dead. If I go to prison, I'm the one that got to do the time. And I took everyone I loved to prison with me. That was a hard reality because I didn't feel like my family loved and cared for me. And then I watched them suffer from my absence. But then on my way out the door, I had created this new family and this new community, and I couldn't take them with me. And so I carry that survivor's remorse because I am the product of all these people who invested and they saw something in me when I didn't. And it's been hard transitioning from living my life instead of living for them, because that's not fair to me nor to them, right? But I'm in the process of trying to find that balance now.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. There's challenges and there's pain in these challenges, but there's also beauty in these challenges, right? Like that this is life.
Yeah.
In this rebirth, you found Prism Way. How did Prism Way affect you and help you grow into the man you're becoming today?
I can't help but smile. So the day after I find out my cousin was murdered, Alan, who is a co-founder, he calls and we're talking. I tell him and he's like, you need to come down. Like, you need to share space with community. It's like he knew that community was the medicine, right? And so I came down here to this beautiful space. He showed me around and I was able to talk about what I was feeling. And then Cindy, who was another co-founder, never met her a day in my life. And I told him, I'm like, I think I need therapy. And so she picked me up and she took me to the beach. And just to be out in the open and to like experience that was very refreshing. And, you know, I just get emotional thinking about it. It confronted so much. You know, I was raised in an environment where white people were the enemy. And here's this lady, she didn't even know me. Like, I'm fresh out of prison and she picks me up in her car, takes me to the beach, feeds me. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I didn't even know these kind of people existed.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stood out for me is when I began to come around and was eventually employed at the Prism Way, they told me, everything that you do here is yours. We are not in ownership of you. We are a platform to help you elevate. And that was like profound. Like, they actually had me sign a document of like my intellectual property. And I'm looking at this form like I have nothing to put here. They're like, it's okay. You'll create something and you'll do something. And we just want you to know that it's yours. And the faith that they've shown, the belief that they have in me, Kristen, Alan, and Cindy have single-handedly helped me deal with another mental health problem, which is imposter syndrome. Right? For those who don't know, imposter syndrome is someone who's experienced so much trauma in their life and have dealt with such a deep level of low self-esteem that even as they start to progress in life, they don't believe it because they're so focused on their past that they can't see the present. Everyone else can see the growth but them, and they feel like an imposter. And for me, that will sum up my whole life, because I felt like an imposter because people were seeing what I was doing, but they didn't know why I was doing it, right? And my healing has solidified working here. We have a built-in support network. We support each other. We celebrate each other. We challenge each other. They provide training because, as gifted as we are all dealing with post-incarceration syndrome. We're all dealing with like arrested development, meaning like I went to prison at 16. I came home at 33. In some areas, I am very mature. In other areas, I am very immature. And there's a gap there. And formerly incarcerated individuals have to be handled with care. And this is a trauma-informed space where we don't just check in about the good things. What's frustrating you? What's overwhelming you? What are you upset about? And let's find coping skills and strategies to help you manage that. And so, like, I do not believe I would have made it so far, right? Like, in this year, I've been home a year now. I discharged parole. I graduated from Tarzana Treatment Center as a peer support specialist and is certified in the state of California. We've paneled in New York, and we've done like college speeches. Like, we've done so many things. We mentor youth. And that's all because of the belief that the Prism Way has had in not only me, but in everyone here.
Wow. For someone that has just gone out of prison, what words of encouragement? I heard through all of that, what you just said, the power of community.
Absolutely.
Like, I know it's hard. When my uncle had gotten out, I remember watching a video of him learning how to use a phone. And he was so like, how do you use this camera? He was like, no, don't record me. Don't record me. He was like so nervous to be recorded. But he didn't even know how to use a phone. Right? And I saw my uncle helping him, my other uncle. And I saw the beauty of that community. Like, to get back into this world, the community is so important. What would you say to someone that is seeking community right now? A man, whether he got out of prison or not, someone that is seeking community. What would you say is like a good starting point for that person seeking community?
I would say that I would share first and foremost, like, something God told me before I got out of prison. He says, create around you what I've placed within you. And for me, I'm free. I was spiritually free before I ever walked out of prison. And freedom is the ability and the willingness to not allow the things that were done to us to hold us back, right? And so for anyone who's like dealing with shame, trauma, feeling isolated and alone, you will only be able to overcome that if you find the courage to be vulnerable and to talk about it, because what you will find is that you're not alone. And human connection is the most purest form of healing. And you have to find the right community to heal with, because there are those who just are not equipped, or they're not in the season to assist you. And if you try to like circumvent the process, you'll damage yourself and that person. And so find people who are more interested in being genuine than they are being perfect. I've never seen God ask someone to be perfect. But being genuine is like the goal here and in my life. And if they're local, please come down to the Prism Way and share space with us. And if they're not, let's find a way to do it virtually. But community is the answer, because ultimately, like you heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
It does.
The narratives that are being presented by the people around us are shaping the way we view ourselves, others, in the world. If you're not in a healthy relationship with your community, it's hard for you to practice a healthy lifestyle.
You drop so many gems. It is so important who we surround ourselves with, what we're listening to, who's speaking life into us, how we're speaking life into other people, what we're pouring into. It's so important. I'm so grateful that Cindy found you.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so Cindy is a special person. And what they've created, all three of them, in Prism Way, when she shared this story with me, I was just like, I knew she was awesome, but then I was like, wow, you're changing lives. And for me, that's what we're here to do, is to be of service, to help impact this world. I'm so grateful that y'all found each other. I'm so grateful. Now, I want to touch on one more thing, because as a father, as a man coming out of prison, now you're an active father. I know there are a lot of men that probably have challenges with this aspect of their life, coming back into this world, and now showing up as a father is a big responsibility. Not every man takes on. How are you doing that now? I know. I know. It's not easy. But it's beautiful to see.
It is. I used to tell people, like, I was a full-blown gang member And this little girl scares me, right?
How old is she?
And she's 7 now. But when I came home, she was 6. And I was so afraid because like I had parent through a phone, right? 3 questions. How are you? How was your day? What did you learn? Those are the 3 things I said every time, right? And I just didn't feel I had the right to be her parent. There was so much shame. And for her, her daddy's home. For me, I've been gone 6 years. And there was a disconnect in the relationship to where like I didn't feel I had the right to tell her, don't do this, don't do that. And I'm aware that as her father, I'm supposed to set the boundaries. I'm the first man she's gonna fall in love with. And it took me about 8 months to really like get over the fear, to learn how to co-parent, to learn how to be present, to not be so concerned and focused on being liked by her, but to actually like equip her with life skills. And today, I have a very, very healthy relationship with my ex-wife, and I see my daughter consistently. I take her to gymnastics every Thursday, and you know we talk, and she's like the most amazing child ever. But it was really hard, and as a father, I don't feel like enough men talk about how difficult it is to be present, especially for Black men. Because on the one hand, I should not get praise and accolades for what I'm supposed to do as her father. But I also don't want to be like projected to be Superman either. Like I'm a human being and I get overwhelmed and I get tired as well. And so finding that balance where like I had to sit down with her mother and say, listen, like I feel like you're kicking me while I'm down. I am in the process of rebuilding my life and I want to be here for my daughter and I have a vision of the father I want to be and I'm not living up to that standard. I don't need you to kick me while I'm down. And that conversation opened up a door for us to talk about it. And it was me being vulnerable.
Yes.
Because my ex-wife called me one day and she says, Fred, you look at me like I have like crap on my face. Like it's almost like you hate me. And it wasn't that I hated her. It's just that, once again, being passive, I didn't want to destabilize my access to my daughter and I didn't know how to communicate what I was feeling. And it was Cindy and Kristen who sat me down and talked me through. Like I had full-blown panic attacks, like crying. She's going to take my baby. And they're like, Fred, you're a great father. No one is going to take your child from you. But I was dealing with the fear. And a lot of men are dealing with fear. The fear of not being able to provide. The fear of not being able to please their woman. The fear of not being able to be a better father to their child than their father was to them. And that fear, because we live in a society where fear is seen as like, you're not supposed to be afraid.
Yeah, like it's weak.
Fear is a motivating factor. Matter of fact, if we go biblical, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so like now that there are spaces where I can talk about my fear, I can channel it now. I'm so afraid of being a bad father that I listen to my daughter. That I'm willing to put down what I'm doing. There's times when my daughter's like, Daddy, who's texting you? Let me put my phone down. Like, and to be present.
And you're listening. It's active listening. You're hearing everything that is being said without it even being said.
Right. Yeah.
That's special. Vulnerability is the key to life.
Yes.
Vulnerability is the key to love. Vulnerability is the key to connection. And I know so many men have that fear of vulnerability because it is seen as weak. We as women have fear with vulnerability. It was hard for me. It still is sometimes. Creating safe spaces like Prism Way to hold the space for you, to have people hold space for you that sees you, that allows you to be vulnerable, is creating this beautiful being in front of me. And I just want to say thank you for being courageous enough to take on this thing that we call life.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, because it's not always easy. It's challenging, and we have our highs and we're going to have our lows. But the beauty of you is that you're up for the challenge and you can hold yourself accountable for the maybe I shouldn't have done that, or no, I did fuck up.
Yeah, I think people ask me, like, how heavy was it being sentenced to 30 years at 17? Yeah. And I tell them, ironically enough, that was not the heaviest burden I've ever bore. And they always ask me, well, what is it? It is the reality of knowing that I hurt people simply because I was hurting. I say that to say, the reason I'm willing to hold myself accountable is because I know what it's like to lie to myself. Like, the worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves.
Yes.
We're the ones saying we're not worthy.
Yes.
We can't go for that promotion.
Yes.
We can't date that person. We
Yes.
can't buy that car. We're the ones saying it. And when other people say it, we get mad because they're confirming what we already believe. And so for me, my definition of like maturity and healthy, like for one, healthy is sexy. That's the new thing.
Period.
And let that be said, because there are these narratives out there where I'm toxic. That's not sexy.
No. And it's not cute.
But in order for me to be mature, I have to be able and willing to not only be held accountable, to hold other people accountable. Because we could never have anything stable unless we hold each other accountable to sustain it. I don't want temporary success or temporary peace or temporary freedom. I want sustainable success. That's not money. That's not relationships or sex, I should say. I want to be able to connect because I know what it's like to feel so disconnected in a room full of people.
I just hope y'all are listening to this. And if y'all need to press pause and replay that what he just said, please press pause and replay that. There are so many people that think they're present, but they're not. Yeah. And I know what disassociation feels like. I was dissociated for a long time of my life. A long time. I actually still in moments find myself disassociating. Like I'm so aware of it, I find myself like dropping out. And when I do that, I go home and I go, what was around me?
Right.
What was I feeling like? Who was speaking? What was I doing? And how can I change this? Why? What's happening? Am I tired? Am I eating well? Like there's so many things that create this disconnection of humanity amongst us all. But how do we get back to that connection and that success?
Yeah.
I know so many people that think that wealth is success. I've been around some of the wealthiest of the wealthiest, and there's no success there.
No.
There's pain, there's suffering, there's shame.
No.
Money's not going to bring you healthy happiness, your heart feeling full, awareness, that community. Because if you're always wearing these masks, how can you attract what God wants to send you?
Absolutely.
Right?
You know, one of the biggest things for me is that when I wore these masks, every person who believed it made me feel that much more alone. Because I actually wanted you to see that I was hurting.
Yes.
So when you believe my lie, it hurt. And yet my survival told me I still needed to lie, but I was hurting. And another component of the mental health is apathy, right? Like being apathetic is like being numb and not being able to feel, because I'm trying to turn off the negative emotions. But the thing is, we just have emotions. So when you turn off one emotion, you turn off the other.
Yes.
And as men, we live in a society where it's like black men, right? The chances of being pulled over and shot is present. You know, the chance of being hit up, walking up the street is present. The chance of like, you know, not having a job where we can cover our, like all these things. And so because we're feeling so much, we shut off. Yeah. And we become like desensitized.
Yes.
And we develop these mindsets and we get the case of the efforts. And a lot of people around us want to support and uplift us, but they don't know how, because we don't even know how to uplift and support ourselves. And so like it goes back to community. it took me to be around other people because there are things in me I didn't see. I needed to be around other races. I needed to be around women. And I needed to be willing to hear what they had to say. Like, hey, Fred, you're smart, but this. Hey, Fred, you're this. And I'm like, you're right. So, like, I hope that this month encourages more men, join the conversation, be in spaces with people, share spaces. You don't even have to talk, just listen. And what you'll realize is you're not as unique as you think, in the sense that, like, people feel what you feel.
Yeah.
You are a whole person and God created you with a purpose, but God never intended for us to be alone.
Ever.
Never.
I am blown away. I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but only because YouTube only allows us allotted such amount of time. We're gonna wrap things up. But Fred, thank you for your courage and your bravery. Thank you for your confidence. Just sitting with you, I can feel you in your body and in your power. And it's inspiring to me.
Thank you.
So I know everybody listening to this is going to be inspired and just like, wow. Sometimes I just listen to you and in my head, I'm like, wow. Because there's so much beauty in you and it's so cool to witness you experiencing this beauty now, regardless of what you have came from.
Right.
So with Girl, We Got This, our podcast, we always end with one question to close. And that one question is, what would you tell your younger self? If you could look at Fred, let's say at teenager Fred, 13, right before you got into prison, 13, 14. If you could look at him right now, what would you tell that younger version of you, knowing what you know today?
I would tell him it wasn't your fault. And no one expects you to be able to handle the things that you've been through. And knowing what it feels like to be harmed, to feel neglected, to feel unloved. Think before you decide to go out and hurt other people. Because the same feelings that you're feeling, you're going to create that from someone else. And ultimately, you're not going to want that. I see you. I honor you. I appreciate you. And I thank you for carrying us through everything we've been through. I know it took me a long time to see it, but you're the superhero in this story. You survived. You overcame. And I just want to honor you.
That's so beautiful. I'm so proud of you. I want to say thank you to Prism Way for creating this space for you to heal and to thrive and to just grow. I am so excited to watch your journey. And I know everybody else that's watching on the other side of the screen right now is like, wow, this man. What is next for Fred?
Praise God, yeah.
Thank you. Y'all can stay up with Fred in the Prism Way and these incredible men on their podcast at the Prism Way. It's a weekly podcast that you guys share. And they share their tools. This knowledge that he's literally effortlessly sharing with you, they share it on their podcast weekly with the crew, with their community. And it's so special what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
So, we got this, Fred, right?
Absolutely.
We got this. Thank you so much for coming on. And again, cheers to this next journey, to the next chapter. And we're cheering you on.
Praise God.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Always. To my brothers, to my sisters, we got this.